DuckTales 2017, episode 19, titled The Other Bin of Scrooge McDuck, begins on very near to the night of a full moon. It is slowly filling out as it goes along, as Magica Dispel's shadow is cast over a sleeping, unsuspecting Scrooge. We see that Lena, under the orders of Magica Dispel, as always, has managed to find a diamond dagger in order to break the unbreakable thread that ties Scrooge's number one dime around his neck. Magica still is seeking out the power of this cherished item, which, knowing how long Scrooge has had this item and just how much sentimental value it has, you really can tell that there really must be some great amount of magic towards this item. However, Webby does manage to walk in on Lena. Lena grabs Webby and they make off before Scrooge wakes up, who immediately knows that something's up. Webby then questions why Lena would be in Scrooge's room, but Lena then very cleverly turns this all right back on Webby, saying, "Why are you also in Scrooge's room?" Which it's creepy, no matter what you think it is. I love Webby, but it's weird. Ultimately, Lena plays it off like she has also become a fan of Scrooge as well, and so Webby kind of starts to induct her into the fan club of Scrooge McDuck. Meanwhile, Magica Dispel, the Shadow, sneaks off to further places in the mansion and spies Miss Beakley talking with Scrooge. Scrooge notes that there's a bit of a tear at the unbreakable thread that he keeps his number one dime attached to. So it shows that both Beakley and Scrooge know something must in fact be up in the mansion. Huey overhears this and he personally also has a little bit of something going on that ties very loosely into the B plot. Magica, however, is getting very aggravated with Lena and her friendship with Webby. She's become annoyed and just wants things settled ASAP. She passes along the information that Scrooge has is placing the number one dime in something called the other bin. Lena brings this up to Webby, who then is very shocked and says they should stay away since the money bin is where Scrooge puts his money, whereas the other bin is where Scrooge puts the other stuff. Basically, all the supernatural items, mystical in nature, cursed, evil, so on and so forth. You know, what would be a good comparison? I'm drawing a blank into any kind of comparison. Something's rattling around in my brain. Meanwhile, we continue on with the B plot, which sees Dewey and Louie confronting Huey over the fact that he has brought home a Bigfoot. Huey explains that apparently he had found it injured in the woods with a thorn in its foot, and he ended up taking him home in order to nurse him back to health and, form a friendship. However, Louis is less than happy to have this creature in his home, as it seems to be pretty much taking advantage of their kindness. Not to mention, it's a bit of a crybaby and kind of gets Huey and Louie on his side. Huey and Dewey. On its side by busting out the waterworks every time Louis is a little bit mean to it. Meanwhile, Scrooge goes on the hunt, searching out for anything amiss in his mansion. Lena and Webby kind of trail behind Scrooge, backtracking through the door where he had placed his number one dime. They go through the garage where all the oddities from the first episode were. And they do find a painting that ends up leading them into this kind of catalog warehouse underneath the mansion. They find various doors in reference to various adventures that Scrooge has had. Webby is very reluctant to go further as she feels that, this is a little above their heads in terms of everything. However, Magica insists Lena further. And I have to point this out, at least here, if not just somewhere, that the animation in this episode is fantastic. The movement of the character, there's so many frames to each of their movements. There's so little details here and there, just subtly. The way Magica moves is beautiful, so elegant and flowy. But I mean, that's always been the point with her and the shadow, but here especially, it's on point. And there just seems to be just a slight bit more effort put into this episode as a whole, which I just really appreciate. Because when animators go that extra mile, that's how you know you are watching a grade A piece of work. But moving on, they find this door with a unicorn behind it. However, we soon discover this is what Webby refers to as a sword horse, and it goes on the attack. Meanwhile, the Bigfoot is basically using the panini maker and eating up all the good food, as Louis calls it, and he's starting to get a bit frustrated with Bigfoot's antics. Much to Huey and Dewey's kind of loss, as they just don't understand how Louis could be so, dismissive of the adorable creature. They end up ducking and dodging past Scrooge the best they can and trying to keep Bigfoot under wraps. Meanwhile, Webby and Lena continue to deal with the sword horse, as Webby puts it. I love that name. And Webby even battles it with Lena's diamond dagger, which is fairly cool. But Webby does question why Lena would have a freaking diamond dagger of all things. Ultimately, they do manage to find the bin that, that Scrooge's number one dime is ultimately behind. Meanwhile, both Huey and Dewey start to berate Louis more and more because, Louis up until this point and even before that has always been about the long con, taking advantage of people wherever he can, having Dewey do his chores, disguising them as world records, scamming Scrooge into donating money to a charity, which is essentially just Louis himself. So they've become very distrusting of Louis as a whole. However, Louis does manage to find out that the Bigfoot, is more intelligent than he lets on, even inviting some of his friends to come party at the mansion. Louis confronts the Bigfoot over this, but since it's a Bigfoot and he is very strong, he immediately threatens Louis and the family. And Louis ultimately just shoos away Uncle Scrooge in order to keep him and the family from getting hurt. Huey and Dewey confront Louis, still believing he is being mean to the Bigfoot, and Louis is more than ready to, just kind of, go at the beast, essentially. He's saying, you just poked a bear, which I love that line, basically. Louis is ready for some serious business. So Lena and Webby get ready to go into the vault that has the number one dime, and Lena locks Webby out, allowing Magica Dispel to, coax her into grabbing the dime. Lena grabs it, and I love this effect where Magica's shadow form covers Lena, kind of like the Venom symbiote from Spider-Man. And finally, Magica managed to get a physical form, and she starts to kind of congratulate Lena despite Lena's misgivings. Webby manages to get in using the diamond dagger and spots Magica. She tries to tell Lena, to get Magica away from Lena. However, Magica gloats and mocks Webby, saying that Lena had been working for her the whole time. This angers Webby, and Webby tries to escape and tell Scrooge about what has happened, but she is turned into a doll. Very reminiscent of the classic Webby from the original series. And, Magica starts to manipulate the doll Webby, mocking Lena, who is very angry that Magica would do this to someone who Lena, despite everything, still considers a friend. Um, Magica then tries to get Lena to hand over the dime, but Lena basically turns on Magica, saying that she does not want her to get this power in her hands. Magica tries to attack Lena, but she still has the amulet that keeps, this protective field around her. But Magica then uses the Webby doll to assault Lena, only for the amulet to utterly disintegrate the Webby doll. Which is a very heartbreaking moment, only for us to find out that this was from Scrooge's Dreamcatcher, magical Dreamcatcher. Webby had referenced this to Lena very earlier on in the episode, only for it to finally come into play here and now. Lena had basically been living her worst nightmare and decides that it's not worth it to even try to get the dime, much to Magica's anger. Meanwhile, Louis had cut off all the Bigfoot's hair in its sleep in order to, convince the boys that, because Bigfoot had been brought into a more civilized environment, it had become sick. Ultimately, the boys start to drag the Bigfoot back to nature, and when confronted by Scrooge, Louis gives this heartfelt speech about, family and what it means to, have family and for family be out there, and, how Scrooge shouldn't harm the creature because the creature is important to someone out there. Scrooge buys into it, and the boys hug the Bigfoot goodbye, and Louis leans in with a final "I win" before slapping the Bigfoot away to get it to go back into the woods. So the Bigfoot has no choice but to retreat, which just shows how devious and underhanded this version of Louis can truly be. Meanwhile, as Lena and Webby try to exit the other bin, they are confronted by Scrooge McDuck, who, calmly states that if Webby wanted to know anything more about him, she simply could have asked. Webby gives Scrooge a hug, and they proceed out, only for Lena to kind of take a stand against Magica in the last moments, deciding that she would rather side with the Duck family. She tries to tell Scrooge about who her aunt is, only for Magica to, take hold of her. In this last moment, controlling her speech and her body, and ultimately Magica assimilates with Lena, fully taking over her mind and body. So this is the status quo going forward, which is very unfortunate in terms of Lena. I feel a little gypped for a little bit though, because here we had this moment where Magica had gotten the dime and she was displaying all these powers and capabilities, and man, she was so threatening. But to find out it was simply just a dream seems a little cheap. But to have this little moment towards the end where Magica has fully taken over Lena as a whole, gives a sense of urgency going forward. The wolf is in the henhouse, basically, and is ready to jump on Scrooge at a moment's notice. But again, the animation in this episode was great. Magica Dispel's voice actress must be having a ball throughout this, because she was just going ham, mimicking Webby's voice. She had so many lines. It was just fantastic. And though it is not the original kind of Romanian, I guess, or Russian voice that Magica had, this more British voice is just superb personally. And I love every bit of it. And I'm so interested to see where we go from here on out. The previews from San Diego Comic Con had come out showing that there definitely is going to be one big final assault against Magica Dispel, which I am more than looking forward to. And, a lot of interesting classic Carl Barks created, and just a lot of characters from Duck history, Disney Duck history are going to start making appearances. So some interesting things are going to start going down from here on out. But I've chatted enough. Tell me your thoughts on this episode in the comments below. Tell me what you thought. And if you liked what I had to say about this episode, leave me a like or even a dislike if you didn't. And subscribe for more Ducktastic DuckTales reviews. Thanks for joining me.